Okay, so I think we're ready to start. And so today is June 6th, 2020, and we'll start with 3 times the verse of homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And now we're going to go back to our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours. And I'm jumping around a bit because if I take every sutta in sequence, I might be in my advanced 80s by the time we finish the Anguttara Nikaya. And so I jumped over a few suttas, and I come now picking up the more interesting suttas. And so now we come to the Book of Fours, Sutta number 41. And this is a sutta that deals with different types of samadhi or concentration. And so the sutta begins with the Buddha first providing the udesa, or the concise teaching, in which he just enumerates the 4 kinds of, it's called samadhi bhavana, 4 kinds of development of concentration. So first there is the development of concentration that leads to dwelling happily in this very life. There's a technical expression for this. Well, first I'll enumerate them all, then we'll deal with the actual words in more detail. Then there's the development of concentration that leads to obtaining knowledge and vision. Third, a development of concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension. And lastly, a development of concentration that leads to the destruction of the asavas, a word translated here as the taints. Yes, so the general topic in Pali, it's samadhi bhavana. And so the word samadhi, we never really have quite an adequate rendering for this word in English, because samadhi is referring to a particular state of mind, state of consciousness, which is not familiar to Western psychology. Those states of samadhi would have been experienced by, say, the Christian mystics through their practice of contemplative prayer. But it's not a concept that figures in ordinary Western discourse. And so we always, when translating from the Pali into English, we always have to come up with sort of makeshift renderings for this. And the word itself, samadhi, comes from a prefix sam, another prefix a, and then it's based on the root da. And the word da means to put or to place. And so the prefix sam has the sense of together, and a is maybe like bringing close by. So it's bringing close together, putting close together. And so it refers to the process of, you could say, of gathering the attention, the attentive functions of the mind, gathering them together and focusing them on a single object, or unifying unifying the typically distracted and dispersed aspects or quality of attention. And so we take the English word concentration, which is actually literally, it's not bad. So the prefix kan in English corresponds very closely to the sum in Pali. And then concentration, we have the core of that word is center. This is the British spelling. English is center. So it's centering the mind. So usually the mind is moving towards peripheral objects, going in this direction, in that direction, scattered and distracted and dispersed all over. And so through the practice leading to samadhi, we are collecting the mind and centering the mind so that the mind can be sustained, continuously sustained upon its object. And then the word bhavana, we come to translate it as development or cultivation. And literally it's from a causative of the verb bhavati, to be. The verb is bhavati, to bring into being, to develop, to arouse, to establish. And so these are 4 ways of developing, bringing into being, and sustaining samadhi, concentration, the unification of the mind. And some of the suttas and commentaries explain samadhi. They give a definition of it as cetas ekaggata. So cetas is of the mind, and ekaggata comes from eka, which means one, and agga, which means point. And then the suffix ta gives a sense of like ness, like English, ness. So cetas ekaggata is one-pointedness of mind. And so typically the mind jumps from point to point, the points being the different objects of attention. And through the practice of samadhi, the development of samadhi, we arrive at a state where the mind settles down on one point and remains continuously, constantly, undistractedly focused on that one point. So as we'll see, there are different ways of developing this unification of the mind. Okay, from this now we can look more closely at the words of the sutta. And so this is the breakdown of this initial summary. And so the Buddha begins by raising the question, what is meant by the development of concentration that leads to dwelling happily in this very life? Yeah, so the expression used here is Dita Dhamma Sukha Vihara. Actually, I have it just below already. So Dita Dhamma means, Dita means seen, Dhamma means a state, Sukha means pleasure or happiness, and Vihara is dwelling or abiding. So this term Dita Dhamma, the seen state, is a kind of expression, which means it's an idiomatic expression which comes to mean in this present life, in this very life. And so when we put all of these words together, we get the meaning of a pleasant dwelling in this very life, or a dwelling happily in this very life. And so what is the way of developing that concentration? Or what is the result of developing that concentration that leads to dwelling happily in this present life? So what's meant here by dwelling happily in this present life, according to the sutta, is dwelling in the 4 jhanas. And so here we just have the standard enumeration or exposition of the 4 jhanas. And so we start off with the first jhana, which comes by overcoming temporarily. It's not permanent, not by way of eradication, but temporarily separating oneself from sensual pleasures and separating the mind, separating oneself from external sensual pleasures. So when there's not indulging in any of the sensual pleasures of sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch. And then inwardly, mentally, one is secluded from unwholesome states, which refers to defiled states of mind, usually summed up in the 5 hindrances. And so when the mind separates from the 5 hindrances and the faculty of concentration becomes strong enough, then one enters into the first absorption, the first jhana, which is said to have a number of factors which are mentioned here in the suttas. The first of these is rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. So when the mind is secluded, separated from the hindrances, and becomes absorbed in the object, then there arises a state of very, very deep and powerful bliss or rapture. The Pali word here is piti. Let me increase the size of this. Okay, so the first factor we have here is piti, which is what we translate as rapture, or it could be understood maybe as a kind of delight, elation, maybe bliss. And then there's sukha, which is what we translate as pleasure or happiness. Which is a feeling, whereas piti, rapture, is more, we could say it's a kind of mood of the mind. And this rapture and pleasure arise when the mind separates, as it separates itself from the inner commotion of wandering thoughts, disturbing emotions, defiled mental defilements. And so there comes swelling up this joy or rapture and pleasure. And yet there's still taking place 2 other factors, which are in a way the means of bringing the mind into this state of jhana, of absorption. These 2 factors are vitakka and vichara, which I translate here as thought and examination. But these English words can be a bit misleading because what is taking place in the jhana is not a process of discursive thinking, but rather, as one progresses towards the jhana, one uses these functions of the mind, vitakka and vichara, to help fix the mind upon the object. So vitakka, for example, was translated as thought. We could see in the earliest stages of concentration, we can see this operating when we're attending to the breath and we're making the mental note in, and with the out breath, the mental note out, out, out. Those mental notes, we could say, are the functioning of vitakka. And while we're making those mental notes, we're watching the breath, observing the breath. And so that observation of the breath is the operation of vichara. And so vitakka and vichara are occurring not in the way of discursive thinking, reflecting, pondering, speculating, reasoning, but they're reduced to their bare minimal function of, you could say, of focusing and observing. And those functions of focusing and observing or noting are continuing in the minimal form, the most rudimentary form. They're continuing in the first jhana. Okay, so this is the first jhana, the first absorption. And again, I have to emphasize that this absorption is a state of samadhi. It's not a state of panya, a state of wisdom. And so meditators can attain the jhanas without having any insight into the nature of phenomena. So the jhanas themselves do not, on their own, do not bring liberation of the mind, but they just bring a temporary separation, a temporary abandoning of the defilements. And because in the jhanas, the mind is separated from the defilements, it dwells happily, it dwells in pleasure, it dwells blissfully. But the defilements are still lingering there within the mind. And so it's not enough to attain the jhanas, but after mastering the jhanas, if one aims for liberation, one would have to go further and develop wisdom or insight. Okay, so this is the first jhana. And now we're going to take the case of a meditator who's going to go through all four jhanas. And so now, proceeding to go on to the second jhana, one has to refine further to a higher extent, to a deeper level. One has to refine the faculty of one-pointedness of mind to continue to unify the mind on the object. And when the mind becomes more deeply attentive to the object, at a certain point, vitakka and vichara drop away. So this is the first jhana. And all of these states are said to be born of seclusion. Please, everybody, mute your microphone. Okay, now as we progress to the second jhana, these two factors drop away. So they sort of get lost. They're eliminated because the mind is now so absorbed in the object that it no longer has to make use of these operations of focusing and observing. Of course, the mind is focused and it's aware of the object, but it no longer has to make so much deliberate effort to focus. That more deliberative, intentional effort of focusing is what falls away. And then it has some new factors come into play here. And these factors are said to be born of concentration because the mind has gained, you see, in the first jhana, these factors are born of seclusion. They arise because the mind is now is secluded from the hindrances and defiled thoughts. So the first jhana is a state of samadhi. And out of that state of samadhi comes a deepening of the factors. And so we have this something called internal placidity. That's the way I translate it. It's ajatang, which means internal. And then there's something called sampasadana. And if you look at this word sampasadana, you see at the center of it is the word pasada, which we had a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing the 3 or 4 objects of highest or foremost confidence: the Buddha, the Dhamma of Nirvana, and the Aryan Sangha. And so what happens when we explain, as I explained the word pasada, when one gains this trust in the Buddha, in the Dhamma, and the Sangha, through that trust, through that confidence, the mind settles down and becomes calm and peaceful. And so it's that same quality of peacefulness, of tranquility, that's being highlighted here as something that arises internally with the attainment of the second jhana. Some other words that might have been used, placidity, it's a rather bookish English word. Yeah, even tranquility would be good, if that's more intelligible. So it's a kind of tranquility which comes because now vitaka and vichara, thought and examination, are like, if you can imagine a pond, and on a windy day, that pond is stirred up into ripples and waves. You can see the surface is wavy, wave succeeding wave. So that's like our ordinary mind. Waves of thoughts arising and dropping away. In the first jhana, it's like the wind has stopped, but there's still a delicate breeze is blowing. And so we don't see any more waves on the surface of the pond, but there's still a little wavelets, very, very small, gentle waves, sort of disrupting the calmness of the surface of the pond. So that is like the mind in the first jhana. But now when the wind, even the breeze stops, then the surface of the pond becomes completely calm, completely settled, completely still. So that is like this ajitang sampasadanam, this internal placidity or tranquility. And then we have another quality is mentioned here translated as unification of mind. The Pali word. Oh, the bridges. Let's see if I could get it someplace else. Okay, I just will. Okay, so the Pali word is ekodi bhava. So bhava is a state, and ekodi, here we render unification. I think it's given as chetaso, ekodi bhava. So chetaso is of the mind, and ekodi is like coming together or unification. So this is the state of unification of mind, which we could say is already present to some extent in the first jhana, but not so prominent. But it comes to prominence in the second jhana. And then there is this rapture and pleasure. Piti and sukha are still here. But now the piti and sukha are said to be born of concentration, whereas in the first jhana, they're born of seclusion. So this would be, you could say, it's a higher level or a more refined level of rapture and pleasure, elation and happiness of the mind. Okay, but now, even though the state is superior to the first jhana, but it has a certain imperfection or a certain defect in it. And that defect is the presence of rapture. Because the mark of rapture, the characteristic of rapture, I said it's elation, or even we could use the word exhilaration. And that when you experience elation or exhilaration, even though you're very happy, but what goes along with that elation and exhilaration? What comes along with it? There's a certain kind of, we could say, excitement accompanying it. And that excitement is at a very, very subtle level. It's a disturbance. Even some suttas even speak of it as a thorn in the side of Samadhi. And so the yogi or meditator now wants to go further and to overcome that rapture. And that comes with the attainment of the third jhana. And so the third jhana is attained with the fading away of rapture. I don't know if you can see this well, but I'll copy and paste. Okay, so now we're moving to the third jhana. And so to achieve the third jhana, what has to be done is to bring about the fading away, the falling away of piti, of rapture. And then it says that the meditator in this jhana, he dwells equanimous, you can see he dwells equanimous. And the Pali word for equanimous is upekako. So this shows that what is coming to prominence in the third jhana is the quality that we call upeka, which we usually translate equanimity. And so, of course, there has to be some equanimity for the attainment of any jhana. Of course, to attain the jhana, one has to be able to withdraw the mind from being affected by pleasure and by pain, and to be able to maintain a balanced, neutral state of mind, which we call equanimity. But even though equanimity is present to some extent in the first and second jhana, it's not yet very prominent. Maybe we could say that in the first jhana, the equanimity is somewhat like the light of the moon, the moonlight, on the first week after the dark moon. And in the second jhana, the equanimity will be like a half a moon. Yeah, after the second week. But in the third jhana, the equanimity is now like the light of the moon after 3 weeks. So we're getting close to the full moon. So equanimity has become prominent. And also two other qualities which are really always present in all of the jhanas, in the whole process of approaching the jhana. These two are mindfulness. You see it's indicated by the adjective sato, mindful, and sampajanya, which is indicated by the adjective sampajano. So the meditator has mindfulness and clear comprehension. And so mindfulness and clear comprehension are essential during the whole process of preparing the mind for the attainment of the jhanas, because one has to focus on an object. For example, if one is using the breath, mindfulness of breathing, you have to be mindful of the breath, and you have to comprehend that the mind is on the breath. So even in the very earliest stages, there's mindfulness and clear comprehension. But now, what happens in the first and second jhana, because of the presence of thinking, both vitakka and vichara, and the presence of rapture, the mindfulness and the clear comprehension are not so prominent. But when this rapture falls away, then the mindfulness and the clear comprehension become more prominent, along with the equanimity. But what remains in the third jhana, along with equanimity, mindfulness, and clear comprehension, is sukha, pleasure. In this case, it's said to be one experiences pleasure with the body. Okay, so this is the third jhana, but even the third jhana is not yet the highest level of concentration, because beyond the third jhana, there is a level of absorption still deeper, still more peaceful, which is called the fourth jhana. And so what is the fault, the defect in the third jhana? Maybe it's a little hard to grasp this, but the defect is said to be pleasure or happiness. It's not that there's a fault in happiness, but as an experiential state, this sukha always has the potential to become an object of attachment, an object of craving, because the mind sort of naturally feeds on pleasure. And so when a meditator masters the third jhana and then looks back on the third jhana, he'll see that that pleasant feeling in the third jhana is always sort of beckoning and saying, come, enjoy me, enjoy me. It's almost like a kind of seductive quality. Come, hold my hand and walk along with me. So it's a little bit of a dangerous, because if the mind becomes attached to the pleasure of the third jhana, then it can slip down to the rapture of the second jhana, then get embroiled in the thoughts present in the first jhana, and then move from the first jhana back down to the mental hindrances. And so beyond pleasant feeling, there is another kind of feeling which is not painful, not pleasant, and therefore it's called the feeling that is neither painful nor pleasant. So that is the characteristic feeling of the fourth jhana. So the way this is described in the text, it says that with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous passing away of joy and dejection, And so now one has gotten beyond all the modes of pleasant feeling and painful feeling. Here, pleasure is pleasant bodily feeling, pain, painful bodily feeling, joy is pleasant inner mental feeling, dejection is unpleasant mental feeling. And so one enters into the fourth jhana, which is neither painful nor pleasant. And it has purification of mindfulness through equanimity. Okay, so the way these key expressions are explained in the Pali or phrased in the Pali, so it has neither painful nor pleasant feeling, so it's a dukkama sukhang. So it's the negation of dukkha, so it doesn't have painful feeling. And it doesn't have pleasant feeling, so neither painful nor pleasant. So the feeling is neutral, but it's not a dull, boring feeling, but it's a very quiet, equanimous feeling. And then it has purification of mindfulness by equanimity. So it has equanimity and mindfulness, which are now said to be fully purified. So in this case, we could say that the equanimity is now, if you go back to the simile of the moon, the equanimity is now like the light of the full moon on the 15th of the fortnight. So it has mindfulness, purified mindfulness, and equanimity. And according to the commentaries, the way they explain this compound, they say that the equanimity of the fourth jhana is the instrument or means for the purification of mindfulness. But we could also maybe interpret this to mean purification of equanimity and mindfulness. Either interpretation is possible. Okay, so coming back to the sutta. So after going through the four jhanas, the Buddha says that this is called the development of concentration that leads to dwelling happily in this present life. And the way I interpret this in the note here, I say that this refers to the attainment of the jhanas either by one who does not use them to develop insight, or by an arhat who enters the jhanas simply in order to dwell at ease. Because if we look at many other suttas, for example, I had For example, the sutta, let us say, the Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 27, which shows the standard, sort of the ideal template for the course of development of a disciple who's aiming at arhatship. In that course of training, which is also called the gradual training, the systematic training, we find the 4 jhanas are included as a key component of the training. And it is on the basis of the 4 jhanas that the disciple goes on to attain the knowledge of insight, which brings the destruction of the defilements, which brings liberation. Yeah, we find this also in the Maha Asapura Sutta, the greater discourse at Asapura. Again, where the Buddha explains the system of training, the gradual system of training. And there we have the attainment of the 4 jhanas. And then based on the 4 jhanas, the disciple goes on to attain the knowledge of the past existences, then the divine eye by which he can see the passing away and rebirth of beings. And then finally, based on the 4th jhana, one develops the experiential knowledge of the 4 Noble Truths. And then through that experiential wisdom, one gains the liberation of the mind from the asavas, from the defilements. So in those suttas, we could say that the 4 jhanas is a development of concentration that leads to the destruction of the taints. But strangely, in this sutta, they're just called a development of concentration that leads to dwelling in happiness or in pleasure in this very life. Okay, maybe at this point I could take some questions. Let us see how we get. Do you know how to ask the questions? You'll find someplace, I don't see it, but you will have it. On the participant list, there'll be a little hand, and you click that hand icon, and then you're able to ask questions. Oh, I see that there are hands already. Okay, Mickey Chiu. So you could unmute yourself.
This is unmute.
Thank you very much. A quick question. I always hear that in order to attain first jhana, we have to get access concentration. Can you explain a bit more what is access concentration?
Okay, yeah, so this is a term often translated access concentration. It's a term that comes in the explanation of the process for attaining jhanas in the Visuddhimagga, which is a kind of classical treatise on the practice of the development of the path. So that expression is upachara samadhi. So upachara means, let us say, the suburbs of a town. It's called the upachara, the environment, the area on the outskirts of a town. So this is the samadhi, which is on the outskirts of the jhanas and getting close to the jhanas. So this is a term. The term occurs only in the Visuddhimagga and the commentaries. We don't find this term in the suttas itself. But it seems to me quite reasonable to suppose that as the meditator is approaching the jhanas, the mind will be concentrated to a very, very strong degree that it's almost sort of standing at the threshold of the jhanas. And so that seems like a reasonable a stipulation that there is a kind of concentration close to the jhana, but not yet in the jhana, even in the suttas. And that is what we would call, what's called in the commentaries, access or upachara samadhi. Okay, next is
Thank you.
Vitri.
Good morning, Bhante. So I wanted to ask about the expression upekka sati parisuddhim.
Yeah.
Usually, when we see the term parisuddhi, it refers or it's related to elimination of the defilements. Is that what is meant here, or is there a different sense? Thank you.
Yeah, here it doesn't mean the elimination of defilements, but it means that the mindfulness and equanimity have been purified of the faults or defects which would be due to the presence. Equanimity would be sort of corrupted or defiled by the presence of even the pleasant feeling that remains in the third jhana. Yeah, so the defilements in the fourth jhana are not yet eliminated, but the defilements go into a state of, let's say, suppression or suspension. But what's meant here by the purification of equanimity is that there's no disturbance of the equanimity by the pleasant feeling of the third jhana, since the feeling in the fourth jhana is neither painful nor pleasant. So that is the kind of feeling that is the appropriate environment for equanimity to thrive, for mindfulness and equanimity to thrive. And so in that way, we can say they're purified. Okay, Olivia?
Good morning, Bhikkhu Bodhi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. As you explain these 4 steps, in the first level of jhana, you mentioned that Vitakka Vichara referred to thought and examination, and also mentioned that this was at a minimum level of focusing and observing. Yeah. And I'm just wondering if at this level, when one observes and focuses, if there is place for making adjustments, because in any training, there is a need to know what you're doing correctly or not, and making the adjustment.
Yeah, I would say in the jhana itself, there's no making of adjustments, but definitely in the procedure leading up to the jhana, there's let's say it's indispensable to be making adjustments, because you'll be constantly seeing the little sort of waverings or deflections of the attention, and also the need sometimes focusing too strongly, sometimes too loosely. And so when focusing too strongly, then one has to relax the focus a little bit. If it's too loose, then you have to intensify the focus a little bit. So all of those adjustments come in the, let's say, the approach towards the jhana, but not in the jhana itself.
Okay, thank you, Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Okay, and next we have Siu.
Oh, hi, Bhante.
Hi.
I have this question because someone asked me this and I didn't know the answer, and I wanted to, since you mentioned this, this is a good opportunity to get the clarification. You mentioned that after, like, in one of the Majjhima Nikaya suttas, like a bhikkhu would develop, the ability to see previous lives, and then what do you call that? Pubbe Nivanusati.
Yeah, that's the recollection of past lives.
Past lives, and then the next one, seeing beings passing away.
Yeah.
The third one is the destruction of asavas.
Yeah.
Okay. Is an arahant always have all these 3 accomplishments?
No.
No, no. The first two, the recollection of past lives and the divine eye by which one could see the passing away and rebirth of beings, those are special knowledges which are certainly not possessed by all arahats. Perhaps only a relatively small proportion of arahats have those knowledges. But it's just that in suttas of the Majjhima Nikaya, there's a particular emphasis on developing those three knowledges, perhaps because those are the three knowledges that the Buddha mentions in his account of his own attainment of enlightenment. Sort of the preliminary to his own attainment of enlightenment was the attainment of those first two knowledges. And so those are arahats who model their practice on the Buddha's practice and attainment will gain those three knowledges. But the essential knowledge for the attainment of arhatship is the third one. That is indispensable. But the first two are not invariably present.
Bhante, do you have any sutta reference that actually points to this?
Well, there are many. I can't think of a sutta which says that such and such a monk didn't attain the knowledge of past lives and didn't attain the knowledge of the arising and passing away of beings. But there are many suttas which speak about a monk getting some instructions from the Buddha, going off into solitude, and then attaining the final goal. And no mention is made there of the other two knowledges.
Thank you.
Actually, there is a sutta, come to think of it, in the Anguttara Nikaya. It's also in the Book of Fours. It might be, could be sutta number 195, 180 or 195, which describes the process of training, and it goes through the four jhanas, and then from the fourth jhana, it goes to the knowledge of the destruction of the asavas without mentioning the other two knowledges. Yeah, you can look at Anguttara Nikaya 4s. Let's see if I could just find it quickly.
Because I've also heard you mentioning about what do you call liberation in two ways and liberation in, is it?
Liberation by wisdom.
Yeah. Is it the same thing we are talking about when we talk about liberating in both ways?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a bit different. Yeah, but I won't go into that now. Oh, no, this one does have the three knowledges. There is a sutta someplace. Which goes directly to the knowledge of the destruction of the taints without mention of the other two knowledges. Okay, but we'll have to move on. Ulysses. Okay, you're.
Yeah, I'm just earlier you mentioned that modern psychology, that these jhanas don't have a proper description in modern psychology. I mean, do you have any words about that, about what modern psychology, how they describe this phenomena?
Not offhand, but perhaps probably nowadays there will be psychologists who are investigating these meditative states and coming up with their descriptions of them. You know, I don't know what particular terms they would use. Probably different psychologists would come up with different technical terms for them. But my point is that in sort of traditional Western psychology, up to the modern age when psychologists are encountering these practitioners of Eastern meditative disciplines, there would not be simple ways of characterizing these states of deep absorption. Okay, we'll move on now. Tan Chi Chung.
Hi, Bante, good morning.
Good morning.
Bante, the word bhavana also appears in another aspect, the 10 meritorious deeds.
10 what?
10 meritorious deeds, the word bhavana appears there.
Yeah, that means, yeah, the development of meditation. Yeah.
In that aspect, it's meditation, but here when you describe bhavana, it's just development of concentration.
Yeah, well, in the 10 meritorious deeds, it would be the development of some meditative object. Yeah, so it would be the development of samadhi, or at least the practices that have the potential to lead to samadhi. Okay,
So it means the same.
Excuse me?
It means the same in the other side, in 10 meritorious deeds. Bhavana means meditation, and here also it means meditation.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bante.
Okay, Jennifer?
Hello.
Okay.
My question is regarding the third jhana, and one of the jhana factors you mentioned is sukha, which is pleasure with the body. Is the body here referring to our physical body, or is this body of the breath, or some other body? What is this referring to?
I have to say, from the formula itself, it's not actually made explicit, but I would not understand this to be the same kind of pleasant feeling in the body that you get if you touch something soft and smooth with your hand, but rather it's the feeling of the pleasant feeling of the jhana, but is felt, let's say, so concretely, so viscerally, that it is if that pleasant feeling is pervading the body.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the way I would understand it. Because this expression kayena with the body is used quite often in expressions to indicate higher attainments, even realizations of meditative experience. And so there'll be, sometimes one sees the expression that one touches the deathless, which is nibbana, touches the deathless with the body. And it doesn't mean that with one's physical body, one actually touches or experiences nirvana, but the experience of nirvana is like so powerful and so concrete that it is as if one is experiencing it with the body. So I take that to be the similar, analogous to that experience of pleasure in the third jhana.
Okay, thank you, Bante.
Okay, we move on to Kenneth. Kenneth
Yes.
Diabro.
Yes, Bante.
Okay.
I was wondering, Bante, could you know, like, is there a way to know when you've reached a jhana? That's the first question. And also, does it matter, like, whether you know? I was just wondering about that.
Let us say that there can be deep states of concentration that one might think is a jhana, but is not actually the jhana.
Yes.
But so that there's maybe it seems to be a very thin line between deep, call it pre-jhanic states of concentration and the jhana itself. And so if one experiences a very deep state of concentration and one wants to know whether it's a real jhana or not, perhaps one would have to go to a meditation master who has a true, thorough understanding of the true, thorough experience of the jhanas, and then discuss your experience, and he could help you distinguish whether it's a real jhana or just a preliminary, and whether it's important or not. Of course, if one is aiming to attain the jhanas, then it's important that one really attain them. But if the aim is to get sufficient concentration for practicing insight, then even preliminary stages of concentration short of the jhanas can be used as a basis for developing insight.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, now we go to Hung or Heng.
Yeah, morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Bhante. I just want to ask, did anywhere in the sutta mention to recommend which method of meditation that will lead the easier attainment of jhana?
That's a very interesting question, because in the Visuddhimagga, that sort of classical commentarial style meditation manual, one finds a list of 40 meditation objects, and then the Visuddhimagga will describe which objects lead to the first jhana, which objects can lead to 3 jhanas, which objects can lead to all 4 jhanas. But in the suttas, I have not found any alignment of particular meditation objects with the jhanas. So my speculation or conjecture, actually, I would actually pretty much trust the Visuddhimagga on this, which says that mindfulness of breathing is capable of leading to all 4 jhanas, and the kasina objects, that is the colored discs, are capable of leading to all 4 jhanas. Other meditation objects, I won't go into the details, but some can lead just to the first jhana, not beyond that. Others, like loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, can lead to 3 jhanas, but not to the 4th. And other meditation objects can lead only to access concentration, but not to the jhanas.
Bhante, another further question is it sufficient to attain the 4th jhana? And what is any additional purpose to go further than the 4th jhana up to the 8th jhana?
Okay, is it sufficient to attain the 4th jhana?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's not even necessary to attain the jhanas in order to develop insight, certainly leading to the first 2 stages of realization, stream entry and once returning. But if one gains the 4 jhanas, then it would provide, of course, a much stronger, more stable base of samadhi for developing insight. Is it necessary to go beyond the 4th jhana to the formless meditations, the arupa jhanas? Certainly not at all, unless one wants to experience the complete range of stages of samadhi, but otherwise not necessary.
I see.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
yeah. Okay, we move on now. Maybe we have time for about 2 more questions. Okay. Who is the one who just asked? Was that Heng?
Yes, Heng. I just Heng.
So then we come to Samantha. Samantha?
Oh, can you hear me, Bhante? Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Bhante. I think you may have already answered the question, but I had 3 sort of questions rolled into one. It was just that we were talking about 4 jhanas, and that and that hindrances are only temporarily suppressed.
Right.
So to permanently suppress the hindrances, how do you go about achieving that? And are the jhanas essential for liberation? One has to, go through practice the jhanas to realize, gain the insights. And the difference, and how, when people talk about samatha and vipassana, are they rolled into one, or there's a bit of confusion, differences? Sorry.
Okay. The first question: how does one permanently eliminate the hindrances? I say all of the hindrances are permanently eliminated only with the attainment of arhatship.
Right.
Okay. Then the second. I remember the first question. The second question was whether the jhanas are necessary.
Yes, Bhante.
I think I answered that with the former question, with the previous question. This is my opinion. There's a lot of sort of disagreements and debates amongst the Buddhist scholars and practitioners. But my opinion, sort of based on close reading of suttas, is that the jhanas are not necessary for certainly for the attainment of the first two paths and fruits, the stage of stream entry and once returning. They seem to come in and play a more important role in the attainment of the third and fourth fruits, once non-returning and arhatship. But I believe it's even possible, at least this is the commentarial position, that there are kinds of arhats who don't attain the jhanas at all. These are called the dry visioned or dry insight arhats.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Okay. And then the relation of tranquility and insight, I won't answer that now because we come to suttas later on in the Anguttara that deal with that issue. So just have to be patient.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, next is Vinyu.
Yes, Bhante, in regards to getting into jhana, so you were at the nimitta stage of seeing the lights. So how do you proceed from seeing the nimitta and that to the next stage of going into the jhana, the first jhana? I am referring to the Upakalesa Suttas where Buddha actually talking to Anuruddha,
yeah,
and that he has facing a bit of a problem, and that he asked Buddha, how is he going to proceed to the next level? Could you give a little bit of light into this sutta as well as the what are the steps that one need to take? That's my first question. The second question is regarding the word sunyata, which is emptiness or void. Is it equivalent to the fourth jhana? Or is it is in the stage of the seven arupa jhana? That's my second question. And my third question is that,
I think we have to take one, because there are several people with questions. Yeah, we have to let, each one has to ask only one question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'll just take the first question. And first, the idea of the idea of the nimittas and the lights that one sees. Again, one doesn't find this so explicitly in the sutta account of the attainment of the jhanas. Maybe the Upakilesa Sutta, it's a little different. It doesn't seem to be speaking so much about the kind of nimitta that appears in the Visuddhimagga way of explaining the attainment of the jhanas. So the nimitta is a kind of light that appears with the attainment of the access concentration in the Visuddhimagga system of jhana attainment. And once that light appears, it's not a matter of doing anything to adjust the light, but one just continues to focus more and more continuously on the light, strengthening the factors, the jhana factors, until they become strong enough to move the mind into the jhana.
So basically you shift from breathing to the light. Am I right?
That is the way the Visuddhimagga explains mindfulness of breathing, but I have to say there are discrepancies between the Visuddhimagga approach to mindfulness of breathing and the way mindfulness of breathing is explained in the suttas. But this raises big questions, and I really have to take now just short, simple questions that could be answered briefly because I have only 5 minutes left before I have to go for the meal. Okay, so maybe we'll take Gita. And if you have big, complicated questions, please pass.
Okay. Good morning, Bhante. Thank you for teaching us. I have a very quick question. When is the skillful time using wisdom to introduce vipassana meditation in the jhanic realms, or is it even possible to do so?
Okay, within the jhana itself, one doesn't develop vipassana, but to develop vipassana, one has to withdraw from the jhana and then turn to develop insight. But again, we're going to come to that type of question arising out of later suttas in the Anguttara Book of Fours. So again, just be patient.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you.
Okay, somebody named Young.
Yes. Hi, Bhante.
Hi.
My quick question is, when one is in the state of concentration, other people can break or disturb by accident?
Can other people disturb that state of concentration?
Mm-hmm. By accident?
Yeah, that can be disturbed, especially through noise.
Yeah.
But if somebody is in a really deep jhana, I would think that perhaps they can't be disturbed. But certainly in the lower stages of concentration, it can't be disturbed by noise.
Okay, yes.
Okay, and then Namal.
Thank you, Bhante. My question is, do you have a perception of time when you're in the jhana, and is it possible to move in and out of jhana in the first stages of practice?
Okay, what I'm told by people who attain the jhanas is that there's not a clear, within the jhana, they're not aware of the passage of time. And so when they come out of the jhana, they say that it just seems like we're in the jhana for almost that we just entered and then we come out, and that there's no clear sense of the passage of time. But it's said that one could develop a degree of mastery over the jhana so that one can make a determination, say one wants to sit in the jhana for 30 minutes. So when, say it's 10 o'clock in the morning, one makes the determination, I'll enter into the jhana for 30 minutes, one enters, and then as soon as the clock reaches 10:30, one just comes out spontaneously.
Thank you, Bhante.
That's what I've heard, yeah. Okay, last question is from Michael Nardella.
Hi, Bhikkhu. Really quick question. As a layperson.
Hey, I'm getting a lot of noise. Okay, go on. I'm not hearing anything. Michael?
Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, speak.
Yes. I'm a layperson. I'm a layperson and I meditate. Is there any way for me to know which level I've attained after my meditation?
I don't think one should be too worried about levels. I would say just continue to do the practice.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if one is very concerned about levels, that creates a lot of vitaka and vichara, a lot of thought formations, a lot of worry, a lot of concern. Just dedicate oneself to the practice and let it unfold at its own pace and not be too much concerned about whether I've reached this level or that level. Okay, I think we have to end now. We have to end for the morning because now it's time I have to go up for the meal. And so let us end with the sharing of the merits. I think I don't have that page on this computer. So we could just do, I will chant the verses for sharing the merits. You just, if you know, you could chant along. If not, you just apply your mind to sharing the merits with the devas, the bhutas or fierce spirits, the nagas, the dragon spirits, and then with all beings. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasana. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacha ehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacha ehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacha ehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya vichi hetato etantare satakayupapanna rupaya rupi sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bante.
Bante.
Okay.
Dear Bante.
You look great. Fantastic.
We love you, Bante.
Love you. Please blessing you.
Thank you very much.